On a warm spring night in 1976, 18-year-old Tara Calico vanished from her family's home in Anaheim, California, leaving behind a cryptic message scrawled on her bedroom wall, "I'll be back." But she never was. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, Tara's disappearance sparked a statewide manhunt, but the killer remained elusive, striking again and again, leaving a trail of terror in his wake. The last time Tara was seen, she was riding her bike in the early evening, wearing a yellow tank top and white shorts. Her parents reported her missing when she failed to return home for dinner. Over the next decade, the Golden State Killer, as he would come to be known, committed over 50 rapes, 12 murders, and 45 burglaries, targeting mostly women and couples in their homes. His methods were chillingly calculated, often using disguises and changing his appearance to evade capture. In one particularly heinous crime, the killer bound and gagged a 10-year-old girl and her 8-year-old brother, leaving them for dead in their bedroom. The police were baffled, and the public was gripped with fear. Who was this monster, and how could he be stopped? The killer's MO often involved breaking into homes through unlocked doors or windows, and he would frequently leave behind a small, seemingly insignificant item, such as a piece of jewelry or a torn piece of fabric, which he would later use to taunt the police with. The police investigation was one of the largest in California history, with over 1,000 leads and countless man-hours spent trying to track down the killer. In 1978, a suspect named Lonnie David Franklin Jr. was identified, but he was ultimately cleared of all charges. The case went cold, but the killer continued to strike, leaving a trail of terror in his wake. It wasn't until 2018, when DNA evidence was matched to a relative of the suspect, that the Golden State Killer was finally identified as 72-year-old Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer. DeAngelo was arrested at his home in Citrus Heights, California, and was later charged with 26 counts of murder, rape, and burglary. In 2020, DeAngelo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The case was a stunning example of the power of DNA evidence and the determination of investigators to bring justice to the victims and their families. Detectives Paul Holes and Ken Clifton were part of the task force assigned to the case. They combed through evidence, interviewed witnesses, and pursued early suspects, but every lead seemed to end in a dead end. The FBI was called in, and they brought in cutting-edge forensic techniques, but even the most advanced technology couldn't crack the case. The killer seemed to be always one step ahead. One witness, a woman who lived in the neighborhood where multiple victims were attacked, reported seeing a man lurking around, but when she tried to get a closer look, he quickly ran away. She provided a detailed description of the suspect, but it was never enough to make an arrest. As the years went by, the case went cold, and the public's attention shifted to other crimes. But for the families of the victims, the pain and the fear never went away. They held on to the hope that one day, justice would be served. But how could they possibly catch a killer who seemed to be a ghost? The victims' families began to organize their own efforts, creating a makeshift memorial in the neighborhood where many of the attacks took place. They also started a support group to help each other cope with the trauma. The case drew national attention in 1978 when the killer struck again, this time in Orange County. The police were baffled by the latest attack, which seemed to be a copycat of the original crimes. But the DNA evidence collected from the latest crime scene was a breakthrough. It matched the DNA from the 1976 crime scene in Ventura County. The police now had a lead, but it was a long shot. The DNA was sent to the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, database, but it wasn't until 2018 that the match would be made. In the meantime, the families of the victims continued to wait for justice. Many of them became close friends, supporting each other through the long and difficult years. They also kept the memories of their loved ones alive by sharing stories and photos of the victims. One family, the Harrisons, had lost their 18-year-old daughter, Kimberly, in 1977. They kept her room exactly as it was when she left for her date with the killer. It was a poignant reminder of the senseless tragedy that had befallen their family. The breakthrough came in 2018 when investigators matched the DNA to a man named Joseph James DeAngelo, a 72-year-old former police officer. He was arrested at his home in Citrus Heights, California, and charged with multiple counts of murder, rape, and burglary. The families of the victims were finally able to get closure, but it was bittersweet. They had waited for so long for justice, but it had come at a great cost. The memories of their loved ones would never fade, and the pain of the past would always linger. It wasn't until 2018 that the case took a dramatic turn. A DNA sample from a 1980 crime scene was matched to a relative on a genealogy website. The investigators were stunned. They had never seen anything like this before. They began to build a family tree, tracing the DNA back to Joseph James DeAngelo, a 72-year-old retired police officer living in Citrus Heights, California. The team made their move, and on April 24, 2018, they arrested DeAngelo at his home. As the news broke, the public was shocked. The Golden State Killer, the monster who had haunted California for over a decade, was finally caught. But there was more to the story. DeAngelo's own family was unaware of his crimes until his arrest. His son and daughter were stunned, unsure of how to process the revelation. How could their father, a respected member of the community, have committed such heinous crimes? In an interview, his daughter, Kim, expressed her shock and confusion, stating that her father was a kind and gentle man who had coached her children's sports teams and attended church regularly. The arrest also brought closure to the victims and their families, who had spent decades waiting for justice. In the courtroom, the prosecution presented a wealth of evidence, including DNA samples, eyewitness testimony, and a detailed timeline of DeAngelo's crimes. The prosecution's key witness, a 72-year-old woman who had been raped by DeAngelo in 1976, broke down in tears as she recounted the traumatic experience. DeAngelo, meanwhile, showed little emotion, his face a mask of calm as he listened to the testimony. The trial was a lengthy and grueling process, but in 2020, a jury delivered a guilty verdict on 26 counts of murder, rape, and burglary. DeAngelo was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led away in handcuffs, the victims' families finally felt a sense of justice had been served. The case was a testament to the power of modern forensic technology and the determination of investigators who refused to give up on solving one of California's most notorious crimes. The trial was a sensationalized affair, with the prosecution presenting a mountain of evidence, including DNA matches and eyewitness testimony. DeAngelo's defense team argued that their client was a victim of circumstance, that he had been driven to madness by a troubled childhood. But the jury was unmoved. On August 21, 2020, DeAngelo was convicted of 26 counts of murder, rape, and burglary. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The families of the victims finally had closure, but the memory of the Golden State Killer's reign of terror would never be forgotten. Throughout the trial, prosecutors played a pivotal role in highlighting the brutality of the crimes. They presented testimony from a woman who had been attacked by DeAngelo in 1976, who described him as being aggressive and forceful during the assault. Another key witness, a retired police officer, testified that he had seen DeAngelo lurking around a crime scene in 1979. The prosecution also presented evidence of DeAngelo's own DNA, which had been collected from a discarded tissue in 1980 and matched to the DNA left behind at multiple crime scenes. The families of the victims were in attendance throughout the trial, their faces etched with a mix of emotions. Some were visibly shaken, while others displayed a sense of determination and resolve. As the verdict was read, a collective gasp filled the courtroom, followed by tears of relief and gratitude. The sentencing hearing, which took place several weeks later, was equally emotional, with many victims' families speaking out against DeAngelo and demanding justice. As the dust settles on this case, we're reminded that justice can be blind, but it's never too late to find the truth. The case of the Golden State Killer serves as a testament to the power of DNA evidence and the importance of perseverance in the face of seemingly unsolvable crimes. The victims and their families will never be forgotten, and their stories will continue to serve as a reminder of the devastating impact of violent crime.